Chosen one, there is something I need to tell you right now, and I want you to hear it, not just in your mind, but in the deepest place in your chest, where the truest things land. God did something for you, not something he has done for thousands before you, not something written in history books as a recurring pattern, not something folded into the general plan for all people of faith. He did something specific, something personal, and something that had never been done before in all of time. He moved differently because of you. And the reason he did it is more tender than you have ever allowed yourself to believe. You have been carrying something lately that has no clean name. It is not quite doubt and not quite confidence. It is the feeling of standing at the edge of something enormous, while the visible evidence has not yet caught up with what you know is true in your deepest knowing. You have prayed, you have waited. You have watched others seem to step into things they were made for, and you have wondered in the quiet hours whether God sees your specific situation the way you believe it deserves to be seen. Whether the details of your life, not just the general shape of it, but the exact texture of it, matter to him the way they matter to you. I want you to know today that they do, not in the general way that a sovereign watches over a kingdom. He watches over you, the way a father watches the window for the one child still not yet home. And what he did because of you is something I have been preparing to say in exactly the right way, at exactly the right moment, because moments like this one do not arrive by accident. They are arranged. They are scheduled in a realm that does not use calendars the way we do, but that has a precision we are only beginning to understand. Before I tell you what happened, I need you to know how this message found you. There are 5 signs that mark the person this word was sent to reach. This is not a general broadcast into the world. It is a specific transmission addressed to a specific soul. And the way you will know it is addressed to you is not by feeling good about it. It is by feeling recognized by it. The way you feel recognized when someone describes an interior experience you thought only you had ever had. The first sign is a sense of being set apart that has nothing to do with superiority. You do not feel better than others. You feel different from others in a way that is quieter and older than ego. Something that was present before you were old enough to name it. Something that has followed you through every season of your life, even when you tried to talk yourself out of it. Your path has always bent in directions that others around you did not seem to have to navigate. The obstacles on your road have been real and specific and have required something from you that a more comfortable life would not have developed. You have known for a long time, even when you did not say it aloud, that you were made for something that ordinary language does not fully hold. The second sign is a season that does not have a name other people seem to understand. It is not depression. It is not confusion, though confusion has visited. It is something more like a sacred suspension, a held breath between what was and what is coming, a place between chapters where the new chapter has not yet begun, but the old one is clearly finished. You have been in this place longer than you expected when you first arrived. And the length of it has tested something in you that you did not know was available to be tested. It has tested your trust, not in the existence of God, but in his specific attention to your specific circumstances. That is a deeper and more delicate test than most people talk about. The third sign is a hunger for the actual presence of God that cannot be satisfied by information about God. You have sat in rooms filled with correct theology and walked away still thirsty, because what you are looking for is not a concept to hold in your mind, but a contact that changes something cellular in your body. You want the real encounter. You want the kind of visitation that leaves a person unable to fully explain what happened to them, only that they are not the same as they were before it came. And that hunger, rather than fading the longer it goes unsatisfied, has grown sharper with time, which is itself a sign that what you are hungry for is real and near. The fourth sign is a surrender that has not yet been publicly redeemed. You gave something up that cost you genuinely. Not a token offering, but a real sacrifice. One that people who did not witness the full weight of it cannot fully appreciate. The return on that surrender has not come in the form you carried in your heart when you made it. The restoration has not arrived on the schedule you believed it would arrive on. And the waiting has confronted something in you about faith, about trust, about whether the God who asked for the surrender is truly the God who intends to honor it. That question is not a sign of weak faith. It is a sign of deep faith that has been asked to go further than it expected to go. The fifth sign is the one that will not let you stop. Something in you persists past the point where persistence is rational. You cannot explain it to people who do not have it. It does not feel like stubbornness. It does not feel like refusal to accept reality. It feels like loyalty to something you heard before you had words for it. A quiet voice that has been saying the same thing since before you could read, and that has not changed its message despite everything the years have brought to contradict it. That voice is not a delusion, it is a commission. And the fact that it has not grown quiet despite the silence from the other side is evidence not of your naivety, but of the reality of what commissioned it. If 3 or more of those belong to you, type 777 inches, the comments, because what is about to unfold in this message is not information. It is the beginning of a recognition that has been building in the spirit for longer than this moment. Now, let me tell you what God did. I want to be careful here because the precision matters. In the long and extraordinary record of how the divine has moved in the lives of human beings across every age and every tradition that has ever known the living God, there is a framework. God works within patterns. He operates through seasons, through process, through the long arc of faith that bends over decades before it arrives at its fulfillment. Covenants are established, promises are given, methods are revealed, and then those methods are honored across generations because they work and because consistency is itself a form of faithfulness. But there are moments that those who have studied the sacred texts across every tradition describe with a kind of reverence that sets them apart from every other kind of theological discussion. Moments when God steps outside of his own established patterns. When he reaches into a situation and responds in a way that has no template in what he has done before. Not because he forgot the pattern, not because the pattern failed, but because the specific person in the specific moment, with the specific combination of their story and their pain and their calling and their surrender, required something that had never been required before in quite this form, and he moved to provide it. Not because it was in the precedent, but because you were in his heart. There is a reason the sacred texts spend so much time on the specific, on the individual names, on the genealogies, and the precise circumstances and the exact words exchanged in the exact moment of encounter. It is because God is not a general principle applied uniformly across a sea of identical situations. He is a person in relationship with persons, and the relationship he has with you is not a copy of the relationship he has with anyone else who has ever lived. The particular sequence of your suffering and your faith and your surrender and your waiting and your refusal to stop, that sequence exists nowhere else in all of human history. And God, who is not constrained by precedent, responded to it in a way that nothing that came before your story prepared him to have already done. I want to tell you something now, and I want you to hold it lightly at first, because the fullness of it is going to come in layers. What God is doing in your life from the outside, in the realm of circumstances and timing and divine arrangement, has a corresponding activation that is happening in you from the inside. not metaphorically, not as a poetic way of describing spiritual growth. Something is being activated in you at a level that science has been quietly confirming for decades, and that most people have never been told about in this way. There is a mechanism in the human brain that God built into every person from the moment of their design, a mechanism that most adults carry in a dormant state without knowing it, and that when it is reactivated does not just change how a person thinks, it changes what a person is able to receive. It changes what becomes possible in their life. It changes the entire range of what they can access from the invisible realm into the visible one. I am going to tell you more about this later, at the right moment, because the timing of when you hear it matters as much as the content of it. But I want you to hold this seed right now. It connects directly to what God has done for you. And when the two pieces meet in this message, something in you is going to click into place in a way that feels less like learning and more like remembering. God is not finished with this message. There is a revelation coming in what follows that will shift the way you understand your own story from the inside. Not like receiving information from outside yourself, but like a memory returning from a place in you that has been waiting for permission to speak. What has happened in your life is not a series of delays or divine oversights. It is the most precise preparation ever arranged for someone whose moment is finally arriving. Here is what God did, not in broad strokes, but specifically. He looked at the exact architecture of your life, every piece of it, the combination of everything you have walked through and everything you have been formed into by the walking, and he saw that you had arrived at a threshold that no one else in all of time had arrived at in exactly this way. Not because your life is more dramatic than other lives, though it may be, but because every life is a singular construction, and yours, with every piece of it, every delay, and every closed door, and every sacrifice you made, and every time you stayed when the rational response was to leave, has created a human being who stands in a position that no other human being has ever occupied. When God looked at that position, at what was required to honor what he put in you, at what it would take to bring to completion what he began in you before you were born, he made a decision. And the decision required him to move in a way he had not moved before. Not a departure from his character, which never changes, but an expansion of his method, a new application of his faithfulness to a set of coordinates that had never existed before. The coordinates of your story, your specific pain, your specific calling, your specific moment in history, the particular gap in the world that only you were shaped to fill. I want to tell you about two men whose stories carry the shape of what God is doing in yours right now. Not because the details are identical, but because the pattern is the same and the God is the same. The first man was the most beloved of his father. He wore a coat that announced something about his future that the people around him were not yet ready to honor. His brothers, the people who shared his blood and his home, threw him into a pit and sold him to strangers who took him to a foreign land. He became a slave in a household where he did everything right and still ended up in prison through no fault of his own. He was falsely accused of something he did not do and imprisoned for years more. 13 years, from the pit to the palace. And during every one of those 13 years, from the outside, it looked exactly like abandonment. It looked like the promising beginning of a story that God had decided not to finish. But God was building something in Joseph that could only be built under that specific pressure. The administrative intelligence he would need to govern a kingdom under crisis was being formed. The capacity to hold enormous power without bitterness toward the people who had tried to destroy him was being constructed in the dark years of the pit and the prison. The ability to see divine pattern in what others experienced as only suffering was being developed through years of having no explanation for what was happening other than the quiet voice of faith. The particular inner architecture that would allow him to say to his brothers that what they intended for harm had been repurposed for something larger than any of them could have imagined. That inner architecture had no other school in all the world except the one God had enrolled him in. The 13 years were not a detour from the purpose. They were the direct path to it, the only path to it. When the moment arrived, God moved with a speed and scale that had no precedent in the way Joseph had moved through every year before it. He was in prison in the morning. By the afternoon, he was governing Egypt. Not a gradual rehabilitation, not a slow increase in visibility and responsibility, an immediate and total elevation to the exact position his preparation had equipped him to hold without being crushed by the weight of it. The completeness of the preparation was what made the swiftness of the provision possible. God did not need to ease Joseph into it because the preparation had been thorough enough to make a total arrival possible. And the same principle is at work in your story. The length and the weight of what you have been through is not evidence that God has been absent. It is evidence that what he is preparing to release to you requires the person you have become, not the person you were before the preparation began. The second man I want you to sit with for a moment was standing in a desert in front of something that should not have been possible, a bush that was fully on fire and not being consumed. Moses was 80 years old. He had spent the first 40 years of his life in a palace and the second 40 years in a desert. The second 40 having begun the morning, he fled from a failure that seemed to have permanently disqualified him from any meaningful role. He was tending the sheep of another man. He had no public standing, no visible influence, no platform from which to do the thing he had been born to do. By any human calculation, his moment had passed before it ever fully arrived. And the God who had put the calling in him was fully aware of what the human calculation said. God spoke to him from a burning bush. That specific form of divine address, fire that burns without consuming, had not appeared before in the recorded history of how God communicated his purposes to human beings. God was not following an established template. He was designing a new form of encounter specifically for Moses, because Moses, in that moment, required something that could not be argued with. Something that would arrest him completely before his rational mind could finish assembling all the reasons why he was the wrong person for the assignment. The bush had to be impossible because Moses needed something impossible enough to override the very persuasive case his history made against his own eligibility. God met him in exactly the form Moses needed, in a form that had never been needed before, and therefore in a form that had never existed before. Your burning bush is coming, not in the same form as Moses received it, because you are not Moses. Your encounter will be shaped for the exact state you are in right now, for the exact combination of faith and exhaustion and surrendered ambition and unextinguished calling that lives in you at this moment in your story. I want you to understand something about timing. God does not release his unprecedented provisions early. He does not release them to earlier versions of the people who are going to receive them. Not because he is withholding out of reluctance, but because certain realities, when received by an unprepared person, are not blessings. They are weights that crush. The preparation is not the obstacle to the provision. The preparation is the only reason the provision does not destroy the person receiving it. You have been in your formation season. Every element of what you have walked through has been forming something in you that is specifically suited to what is coming toward you. The patience has been forming authority. The obscurity has been forming depth. The disappointment has been forming the kind of faith that does not require evidence to sustain itself. The waiting has been forming the character of someone who can hold what God is about to release to them without losing themselves in it. This is not a comfortable message to sit with in the middle of a long and painful wait, but it is true, and the truth of it is what makes the arrival when it comes not just a provision, but a homecoming. Now, let me tell you about the physical dimension of what God is restoring, because the unprecedented thing He is doing in your life lives in two realms simultaneously, and you need to understand both. It lives in the realm of your circumstances, in the divine arrangement of timing and provision and door opening that is beginning to accelerate around you. And it also lives in the realm of something very physical, something in your own brain, something God designed into you as part of your original equipment, and something that most adults are carrying in a dormant state without knowing what happened to it or that it can be recovered. Research conducted across multiple institutions has confirmed that approximately 98% of children, when tested for the form of thinking that researchers call creative genius, test positive. 98%. Not a select and gifted minority. Nearly every child alive begins in this state, a state that scientists describe as whole brain activation, where both hemispheres of the brain operate in a synchronized and fully integrated pattern that produces the complete spectrum of human cognitive and perceptual and creative capacity. The capacity to see what others cannot see. The capacity to